The boy's name was Mateo Reyes, and until that night, the biggest stage he had ever known was a cracked sidewalk outside a small hotel in Cebu, Philippines. He was 16 years old, thin as a reed, with skin darkened by the sun and fingers calloused from years of playing a battered second-hand guitar with missing paint and one string that never quite stayed in tune. Every evening after school, Mateo stood near the hotel entrance where tourists passed by, singing for spare change while his younger sister waited nearby, counting coins and watching the world go by with hopeful eyes. Mateo's mother used to sing Hotel California while cooking rice in their tiny kitchen. She loved the song even though she barely understood the English lyrics. To her, the melody sounded like longing, like being stuck between a place you love and a place you can never quite leave. When she passed away from illness 3 years earlier, the song became Mateo's anchor. He sang it when he was afraid, when the power went out, when hunger gnawed at his stomach, and when he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him too hard for a teenager to carry. After their mother's death, Mateo became the head of the family overnight. His father had left years earlier, chasing work overseas and never returning, and suddenly Mateo was responsible for his sister Lila and their aging grandmother. Music was no longer just a dream. It was survival. Some nights he earned enough to buy rice and canned sardines. Other nights, he came home with empty pockets and an apology he whispered into the dark. One afternoon, an American tourist stopped to listen longer than most. She recorded Mateo singing Hotel California on her phone and asked him where he learned to sing like that. Mateo shrugged and said he learned from his mother and from the radio when it worked. The tourist smiled sadly and told him he had something special, something that could carry him far beyond that sidewalk. Before she left, she gave him a card and said, "If you ever find your way to America, audition for this show." On the card were the words America's Got Talent. Mateo laughed that night when he showed the card to his grandmother. America felt like another planet. They barely had enough money for food, let alone passports and plane tickets. But Lila held the card like it was treasure and told him their mother used to say miracles start as jokes people don't take seriously. Months passed, and the card stayed tucked inside Mateo's guitar case. Then came the storm. A powerful typhoon tore through their neighborhood, ripping roofs off homes and flooding the streets. When the winds finally died down, their house was gone. All they had left was the guitar Mateo had held above his head while wading through waist-deep water to safety. They moved into a crowded evacuation center. Nights were loud, filled with crying babies and whispered prayers. One evening, Mateo sang Hotel California softly to calm Lila. His voice carried through the room, and people fell silent. When he finished, an older man approached him and said he worked with a local charity that helped young artists. He had heard about Mateo before, seen videos online of the boy who sang like his heart was breaking and healing at the same time. That man became the first twist in Mateo's story. Through the charity, Mateo was offered a chance to travel to the United States as part of a cultural exchange program. It wasn't a promise of fame or money, just an opportunity to perform and learn. When Mateo realized this could be his one door out, fear and hope tangled in his chest so tightly he could barely breathe. The night before leaving Cebu, Mateo visited his mother's grave. He sang Hotel California quietly, tears slipping down his face as he promised her he would take their song as far as he could. Lila pressed her forehead against the cool stone and whispered that she would be brave while he was gone. America overwhelmed Mateo from the moment he landed. The buildings felt too tall, the streets too wide, the noise too constant. He stayed with a host family who were kind but busy, and he often felt invisible, like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. English surrounded him, fast and sharp, and sometimes he worried that when he opened his mouth, people would only hear how far he didn't belong. When he finally stood in line to audition for America's Got Talent, Mateo nearly turned around and left. Hundreds of hopefuls filled the room, each with a story and a dream. Some had flashy outfits, others had sob stories ready to spill. Mateo had only his guitar, his accent, and a song that carried his mother's memory. Backstage, a producer asked him why he chose Hotel California. Mateo answered honestly. He said it reminded him of home and of feeling trapped and hopeful at the same time. The producer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. That song had been sung 1,000 times. It was risky. Overdone. But Mateo didn't know how to sing anything else that mattered as much. When his name was called, the lights blinded him. The judge's table looked unreal, like something from television because it was. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Heidi smiled politely. Howie nodded encouragingly. Sophia tilted her head, curious. Mateo introduced himself, his voice trembling as he explained where he was from and why he was there. Simon asked him how he learned English. Mateo answered that he learned from songs and movies, and sometimes from guests at the hotel who corrected his pronunciation while tossing coins into his guitar case. Simon asked him what he would do if he won. Mateo swallowed hard and said he would rebuild his home and send his sister to school so she wouldn't have to sing on sidewalks to survive. The audience murmured, half sympathetic, half wary. Stories were easy. Talent was what mattered. The music began. From the first line, something shifted in the room. Mateo didn't sing Hotel California like a cover. He sang it like a confession. His voice was raw, aching, and strangely controlled, carrying the weight of loss and longing in every note. He didn't mimic the Eagles. He transformed the song into something that sounded like it had been born under tropical skies and survived storms. As he reached the chorus, the crowd leaned forward. Phones lowered. Whispers stopped. Simon's expression changed almost imperceptibly, his skepticism melting into focus. When Mateo sang about being trapped in a place you can never leave, his voice cracked just enough to feel real, and Simon blinked hard. Then came the twist nobody expected. Halfway through the song, one of Mateo's guitar strings snapped with a sharp twang that echoed through the theater. Gasps rippled through the audience. Mateo froze for a fraction of a second. This was it. Years of dreaming undone by a broken string. Instead of stopping, Mateo closed his eyes and kept singing. He adjusted his playing instinctively, changing the rhythm, stripping the song down to something even more fragile. Without the full guitar, his voice stood naked and powerful. The imperfection made the moment unforgettable. By the final note, the theater was on its feet. The applause thundered like a storm. Mateo stood there, stunned, tears streaming down his face as he bowed awkwardly, unsure if what he felt was relief or disbelief. The judges spoke one by one. Howie said he had goosebumps and called it one of the most emotional performances of the season. Sophia said she didn't understand every word, but she felt every emotion. Heidi told Mateo his voice was beautiful because it told a story, not because it was perfect. Then Simon spoke. He paused longer than usual, searching for words. He admitted he hadn't expected much when Mateo walked out. He said the song choice worried him. But then he confessed something that made the room go quiet. Simon said he rarely cried during auditions, but something about Mateo's voice, his honesty, and the way he didn't stop when everything went wrong reminded him why music matters. Simon stood up. In that moment, before the golden buzzer was even pressed, Mateo felt his knees weaken. Simon walked around the table and looked straight at him. He told Mateo that sometimes, the broken string is what makes the performance unforgettable. Then he reached out and slammed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti exploded from the ceiling. The crowd screamed. Mateo collapsed to his knees, covering his face as sobs shook his body. In his mind, he saw his mother's smile and heard her singing in their tiny kitchen. He saw Lila counting coins and dreaming bigger dreams. Backstage, producers rushed to him, hugging him, handing him water, telling him he was going straight to the live shows. Mateo could barely speak. All he could say was thank you, over and over, his accent thick with emotion. But the twists weren't over. A few days after the episode aired, Mateo received news from home that shook him. His grandmother had fallen seriously ill. The guilt hit him like a wave. While his life was changing overnight, the people he loved were still struggling. For a moment, he considered quitting the show and flying back. When Simon heard about the situation, he arranged for medical support through the show's connections. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was quiet, off-camera help. Mateo later said that kindness meant as much to him as the golden buzzer itself. As the competition progressed, Mateo faced new challenges. Online critics accused the show of using his poverty for sympathy. Others said his accent would limit his career. One article claimed he was just another sob story that would be forgotten after the season ended. Mateo read every comment late at night, doubt creeping into his heart. During rehearsals, his voice faltered. He worried that he had already peaked, that Hotel California was the only magic he had. Before the live shows, Simon pulled him aside and told him something unexpected. He said Mateo didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had already reminded millions of people why they fell in love with music in the first place. From that moment on, Mateo sang with freedom instead of fear. When the live shows aired, viewers across America voted in record numbers. Messages poured in from people who said Mateo's audition made them cry, call their mothers, or remember why they never gave up on their own dreams. Filipinos around the world rallied behind him, calling him a symbol of quiet strength and hope. Even though Mateo didn't win the entire competition, his life was forever changed. He received a recording contract, scholarship offers, and invitations to perform around the world. More importantly, he returned to Cebu months later to rebuild his home and stand on that same sidewalk, singing not for survival this time, but to remind himself where he came from. On his final night back home before returning to America, Mateo sang Hotel California one more time under the open sky. Lila stood beside him, no longer counting coins, just listening. The song still held sadness, but now it also held gratitude. And somewhere across the ocean, Simon Cowell would later say in an interview that pressing the golden buzzer for Mateo was one of the moments that reminded him he was in the right business, because sometimes, a single voice from the other side of the world can break through all the noise and touch something human.